In Melisenda Bartolti's kitchen, a scrap of bread or a stone from a granite workshop could still have a place at the table. She had come from the Lake Como area of Italy, and her memories give these food practices a human voice. Stay for the flat stone that held cucumbers beneath brine through the winter. The story moves through food handling, winter preserving, and the neighbors who made difficult kitchen work lighter. Bartolti's account sits beside broader Italian foodways, with each practice tied to an ingredient and a place. Gentile's kitchen writing treated home cooking as practical nourishment and thrift. A little salt pork could season a large pot of minestrone with seasonal vegetables, letting the vegetables carry the meal while the pork carried flavor. Beans could be soaked overnight and cooked without meat or chicken broth. Lentils offered another plain soup, a minestra di magro, a meatless course whose nourishment could be overlooked when a household needed a filling pot. Risotto could begin with rice and broth, then gain body from peas, mushrooms, chicken giblets, or marrow. Those additions helped a small amount of rice carry the weight of a meal without turning the bowl into a display of abundance. Polenta could also meet sausage in the everyday kitchen. A little crumbled sausage in tomato sauce gave the cornmeal a savory center, different from the simple polenta and cheese that Bartolti remembered with such affection. Gentile's recipes also gave yesterday's food another turn. Small rolls could hold chopped cooked meat and giblets, while cooked meat could be minced into croquettes or a ragout. Broth from a boiled chicken could wait for the next risotto. This was the thrift Gentile described for a household learning to make food nourishing and economical. Not a slogan, but a chain of small decisions. Bread, broth, beans, vegetables, and yesterday's meat could each be asked to do another useful job. Cucina Povera carried a plain rule from village kitchens. Food was treated as something to use with care. A peel, crust, or small piece could still belong to the meal, the broth, or the pantry. That was thrift shaped by respect, not a performance of hardship. That rule shaped the rest of the kitchen. Food could move from the cutting board to the pot, from the pot to the table, and from the table back into tomorrow's cooking. Stale bread could be dried, crumbled, and fried in oil before it went over pasta in place of cheese. The result was pangrattato, remembered as the poor person's Parmesan, a little crispness and flavor made from bread that had already served once. The crumbs were humble, but the method changed the feeling of the dish. A plain bowl of pasta could carry the flavor of oil, toasted bread, and careful hands. Hard bread could be softened with broth, then paired with cooked greens and olive oil as pane santo or pancotto. The loaf became the base of a warm dish, instead of a reason to throw food away. Its strength came from broth, greens, and careful seasoning. The dish made the texture of old bread useful again. Broth softened it, greens gave it color and substance, and oil tied the parts together. In Melisenda, Bartolti's oral history, ravioli dough used boiled mashed potato with egg and flour, helping the dough stretch while using less flour. The point was not novelty. It was a way to turn a modest dough into a thin wrapper for a family meal. The potato did not turn the dough into a new dish. It helped the wrapper do its quiet job, hold a filling, survive handling, and reach the table intact. At the same table, the work could pause before the next part of the meal took shape. The hands changed tasks, but the care stayed the same. Melisenda Bartolti remembered rolling ravioli by hand. Our fingers were the machines. Hands supplied the pressure, the rhythm, and the judgment. A machine was not needed for the work to become food worth sharing. The phrase also describes a kind of practical knowledge. The hands knew how thin the dough could go, where to press, and when the wrapper was ready. A folded cloth and a waiting bowl marked a quiet breath between tasks. The hands changed position, but the care stayed the same. White cornmeal was scattered on a wooden board beneath the shaped ravioli. The meal-sized pieces could dry without clinging to the board, So less was torn, less was wasted, and the next step stayed orderly. The board became part of the process without becoming a source of waste. A little cornmeal did a small job, and the pasta stayed ready for the pot. A short pause separates one ravioli task from the next. The process was made of small decisions, each one visible in the hands rather than in a machine. Small pieces of meat were combined with onion, garlic, spinach, salt, pepper, and mint for ravioli filling. The scraps were not asked to stand alone. They were folded into a seasoned mixture that gave a little meat a place inside a larger meal. The filling carried several small tastes together. The meat supplied depth, the vegetables gave it body, and the herbs made the mixture feel complete. Pork offal that a landowner might discard could become salame or pancetta. In this foodway, it served mainly to season a starch-based meal, bringing concentrated flavor without making meat the center of the plate. A small amount could season a larger dish. That balance between concentrated flavor and a filling base is one reason the practice belongs to Cucina Povera. Tripe and other offal could be cooked slowly rather than left unused. The practice expressed a kitchen ethic of using the animal from head to tail, with patient cooking turning an unfashionable cut into supper. Slow cooking gave the cut time to soften and gave the cook a way to make use of food that might otherwise be rejected. Patience became part of the recipe. Fava beans, and potatoes formed the base of the meal, while meat acted as a small accent. A little pancetta or sausage could carry flavor through a pot of legumes or potatoes. The plate was built around filling staples, not a large cut of meat. The accent mattered because it was enough. A small piece of cured pork could pass through a pot of beans or potatoes, leaving flavor behind without taking over. Wild dandelion greens, called cicoria, could be gathered by the roadside and cooked with a little fat. Bitter greens brought a free, local ingredient to the pot, where simple cooking and a little seasoning made them part of the meal. The greens did not need a grand preparation. Their bitterness, the cooking fat, and the heat of the pot were enough to make a gathered ingredient useful. Melisenda Bartolti remembered polenta and cheese as a deeply satisfying staple. Polenta and cheese tasted as good to us then as chicken does today. The sentence carries the memory without needing decoration. A warm bowl and a little cheese could feel like enough when the kitchen knew how to make it count. The memory is valuable because it describes satisfaction rather than display. The food was plain, but the person eating it did not describe it as lesser. In Bartolti's account, a rounded granite knob from her husband's workshop scraps could pound a tough steak tender. This was a meat preparation tool. The rounded stone struck the steak and softened its fibers. It was distinct from the flat stone used to hold cucumbers beneath brine. This stone belongs beside the meat board. Its rounded surface met the steak, while the flat stone for cucumbers belonged in the brine. A small bread roll could be sprinkled with milk and reheated briefly in the oven. The milk softened the crumb, and the heat made the roll feel renewed. The method gave a hard roll another place at the table. The method asked for attention rather than a new purchase. A little milk and heat restored the roll's place in the meal and kept its earlier work from being wasted. After rich ravioli, a salad dressed with wine vinegar and olive oil could cut the richness instead of adding dessert. The meal ended with something sharp and fresh. The oral history explains the choice simply. The ravioli are so rich. The salad was not an afterthought. It was the final balance of the meal, a sharp and simple answer to the richness of handmade pasta. A backyard garden could supply tomatoes, peppers, and herbs for the kitchen. The garden joined cooking and preserving together. What grew outside could season a meal now and become part of the winter pantry later. The garden was a source of ingredients and a source of decisions. What to pick, what to use fresh, and what to preserve began outside the kitchen door. Summer tomato preserving brought neighbors together with basil, jars, and a shared rhythm of work. Children watched the jars and called, "This jar popped." The work moved through the group as a communal food practice. Preserving also required trust between neighbors. Work moved from one pair of hands to another, while the children learned the sounds and signals of the process. Tomatoes could be beaten into paste, spread on wooden boards, turned as they dried, and stored in earthenware. A conserver concentrated the harvest through sun, patience, and repeated attention, leaving a preserved ingredient for later cooking. The paste was a concentrated form of the garden. Drying changed its texture and made a fresh tomato useful in a later pot without adding a new pantry purchase. Red peppers could be sewn into strings, hung from poles, and dried in a cool place. The hanging strands made preservation visible. A summer pepper became a winter seasoning through air, shade, and time. The strings of pepper carried the season into the room. They were food storage made visible, with the work of sewing becoming part of the household landscape. Vegetables and olives could be preserved sotolio or sottosito, in oil or vinegar. These methods turned fresh food into a pantry supply for winter, and kept the work of the garden connected to the meals that followed. Oil and vinegar offered two different ways to protect the harvest. Both joined the garden to the winter table through a practice that took time and care. For autumn cucumbers, Bartolti described a flat stone from workshop waste pressed into the brine to hold them down. This is the flat stone promised at the opening. It belonged to pickling, not steak preparation, and it gave a scrap of granite a second life in the pantry. The flat stone was not a kitchen tool bought for a special purpose. It was a workshop remnant, chosen because its weight could keep the cucumbers beneath the brine. The cellar could serve as a second kitchen, with cured and drying meats held there through winter. Sopressata and capicola-style foodways depended on a cool storage place and patient preservation, extending the kitchen beyond the bright room upstairs. The cellar held more than food. It held a schedule of curing, drying, and waiting, making preservation a continuing part of household life. Backyard grapes could be pressed into homemade wine. 85–90 pounds yielded 5 gallons. During settling, the barrel was handled softly so the sediment would not be disturbed. The memory is as much about gentle care as it is about the drink. The wine memory joins measurement with gentleness. The figures describe the yield, while softly describes the care needed after pressing. Dried chestnuts could be ground into flour for nexai when wheat flour was dear. The chestnut became a flour for a thin cake, showing how a local ingredient could take the place of a more costly pantry staple. Chestnut flour made a local tree part of the meal. The nexai carried the taste of the place and showed how a different flour could support a familiar form. Melisenda Bartolti came from the Lake Como area of Italy, became a widow, and cared for 4 children after her husband Pietro died from lung disease connected to his granite workshop work. She earned money by preparing Italian feasts for American families. Her words, "I got to make that money stretch," closed the circle. These methods were food knowledge, household care, and work at once. Her sentence turns the kitchen into a record of work. Stretching money meant stretching ingredients, time, skill, and hospitality until they could support a household. Taken together, these practices describe a kitchen that used what was near, saved what could last, and let a modest ingredient carry a meal. The work was practical, social, and closely tied to Italian immigrant families. If a family memory belongs in this story, leave it in the comments. Subscribe so these stories aren't lost.